2:13 in the morning. That's when the storm swallowed the street and my house went black. One second the rain was hammering the roof. The next the power snapped off so hard it felt like the air had been ripped out of the walls. Then came the sound I will never forget. Walter's ICU oxygen system started screaming, not a soft beep, not a warning chime, a full, shrill, life-ending alarm that cut through the dark like a blade. I was already running. The backup battery display glowed in the hallway, countdown active. Minutes, maybe less. Maybe less. Inside his converted ICU room, my grandfather, Walter Boone, Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart recipient, was clawing at the sheets trying to pull air into lungs that no longer worked without that machine. I threw the front door open into cold rain and saw her. Celeste Harrow, standing at the locked community utility junction with the metal panel hanging open. Bolt cutters in her hand. She didn't flinch when she saw me. Medical facilities violate residential code, she said calmly, like she was commenting on landscaping. Behind me, Walter's alarm shrieked again. I could hear neighbors' blinds shifting, porch lights flicking on. But no one stepped outside. The backup battery is temporary, I shouted over the storm. Celeste tilted her head. Reconnect illegally and I'll issue immediate fines. Daily. My heart was pounding so hard it blurred my vision. This wasn't enforcement. This wasn't policy. This was deliberate. Inside the house, the oxygen monitor let out a long, broken tone and then began flashing red. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? When I bought the house in Briar Hollow Estates, I thought I was buying peace. Tree-lined sidewalks, identical mailboxes, lawns trimmed like someone measured every blade with a ruler. It looked like the kind of neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever happened. The kind of place where a man could quietly take care of his grandfather without anyone interfering. I'm Marcus Boone, biomedical technician. I've spent most of my career maintaining hospital equipment that keeps people breathing, pumping, surviving. So when Walter was discharged from the VA after his second lung failure episode, I knew exactly what he needed. The spare bedroom became an ICU-grade recovery suite, hospital bed, backup oxygen concentrator, medical-grade air filters, redundant power supply. I wired it myself, triple-checked every circuit. I wasn't turning my house into a hospital. I was turning it into a lifeline. At first, no one objected. The previous HOA president, a quiet older woman named Elaine Foster, had the common sense to understand the difference between cosmetic rules and human survival. The HOA handled landscaping, pool maintenance, holiday decorations, nothing dramatic. I paid my dues on time. I kept the yard clean. I nodded politely at neighbors walking their dogs. For a few months, Briar Hollow felt like refuge. Then Celeste Harrow decided to run for HOA president. She campaigned like she was running for mayor of a city under siege. Flyers about declining standards, emails about protecting property values, speeches about maintaining residential integrity. She spoke with a polished smile and sharp eyes that scanned everything like it needed correction. She won by a landslide. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The first violation notice arrived 2 weeks after her swearing in. Unauthorized commercial vehicle. It was about the oxygen supplier's van. I called the HOA office, assuming it was a mistake. Celeste answered personally. Regular medical deliveries create the appearance of a facility, she said smoothly. This is a residential zone. It's oxygen, I replied. He can't breathe without it. I understand, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't. But we must consider optics. Optics. The second complaint came a week later. Alleged chemical odor resembling hospital disinfectant. I almost laughed, until I realized she wasn't joking. The smell she was referring to was medical-grade sanitizer, the kind that prevents infection in someone whose immune system barely functions. Then came the citation for visible medical supply boxes stacked briefly near the garage before I could move them inside. Commercial inventory storage, the letter read. Each notice felt small on its own. Petty, technical. But together they formed a pattern, like someone slowly tightening a belt. I started noticing the board members more closely. Gavin Pike, the HOA treasurer, always wore press suits even on weekends. He spoke softly, but his eyes never stopped calculating. At meetings, he asked detailed questions about liability exposure and aesthetic consistency. Then there was Trent Lowell, compliance officer, Former private security, from what I'd heard. Thick shoulders, shaved head. He liked to stand too close when he talked, like proximity itself was a warning. One evening, I caught him parked across from my house, staring at the driveway while typing on his tablet. Routine monitoring, he said when I approached. Neighbors began acting different too. Mrs. Calder from down the street stopped chatting about her roses. The Hendersons avoided eye contact. One older gentleman quietly mentioned that two seniors had sold their homes suddenly the previous year after compliance pressure. Better offers came out of nowhere, he muttered. Cash deals. I didn't want to believe there was something darker underneath all this. I told myself it was overreach. Bureaucratic nonsense, new leadership flexing authority. Until the first formal letter arrived by certified mail. I signed for it at the door. The envelope was thick. Inside was a notice titled, "Medical Operations Not Permitted in Residential Units." It accused me of running unauthorized clinical services, increasing electrical load risk, and altering infrastructure without HOA approval. Clinical services. My grandfather struggling to breathe had become a zoning issue. I requested a meeting. Celeste responded with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're simply protecting the community," she said. "From what?" "Oxygen?" Then, 3 days later, another envelope came. This one stamped urgent, certified again. I opened it standing in the kitchen while Walter watched television in his room. Scheduled infrastructure inspection of electrical supply. They were coming to evaluate my power system. Suddenly, Briar Hollow didn't feel peaceful anymore. They didn't wait for the scheduled date. The inspection team showed up 4 days early, no warning, no courtesy call. Just a hard knock on my door at 9 in the morning. I opened it to find Celeste Harrow standing there in a tailored blazer, rain boots spotless despite the wet pavement. Behind her were Gavin Pike holding a clipboard and Trent Lowell with a black utility case tucked under his arm like he was serving a warrant. "Routine infrastructure verification," Celeste said with a thin smile. "We'll need access to the modified room." "Modified room? You mean my grandfather's bedroom," I replied. Trent stepped forward before I could block the doorway. "We have authority under HOA Covenant Section 9. You don't have authority inside my home." Celeste's expression didn't change. "Refusal will result in non-compliance penalties." Walter's oxygen machine hummed steadily down the hall. I felt the weight of that sound, the steady rhythm that meant he was breathing, and I made the mistake of thinking maybe cooperation would make this stop. It didn't. They walked into his ICU suite like inspectors entering a contaminated lab. Walter looked up from his bed, confused. His tubing ran beneath his nose, the concentrator glowing beside him. The room was clean, organized, medical, but it was still a bedroom, framed photos on the dresser. His old service medals in a display case. Celeste pulled out her phone. Click. She photographed the oxygen concentrator. Click. The backup battery system. Click. The extension lines I had professionally routed and secured. "This resembles institutional equipment," she said coolly. "High draw. Potential overload." "It's medically approved," I snapped. "City inspection cleared it." "Here." I handed her the official municipal electrical compliance paperwork, stamped. Signed. Passed. She barely glanced at it. "Municipal approval does not override community standards," she said, handing it back as if it were a receipt from a grocery store. Gavin scribbled something on his clipboard. "Unauthorized clinical modification of residential interior," he read aloud. "Fine assessed." Walter shifted uncomfortably in his bed. I saw it in his eyes, the guilt. Like he had done something wrong just by surviving. "Marcus," he said quietly, "maybe this is too much trouble." That hurt more than the fine. After they left, the atmosphere changed overnight. Neighbors who once waved now watched. Conversations hushed when I approached. Someone posted anonymously in the community forum about medical businesses operating from private homes. Medical business. My grandfather fighting to breathe had been rebranded as a liability, so I attended the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse was packed. Celeste stood at the front beside a projector screen. When she clicked the remote, my house appeared on the wall, a slide labeled "Commercial Encroachment." Gasps rippled through the room as photos of Walter's oxygen equipment filled the screen, taken inside his bedroom. "You entered my home without consent to photograph that," I said, my voice echoing. "Inspection rights were exercised appropriately," Celeste replied. "This equipment increases infrastructure strain and sets a precedent." "A precedent for what?" "Staying alive?" Gavin began citing increased transformer load projections. Trent crossed his arms near the back like security. One woman in the crowd whispered, "I didn't realize it was that extensive." Extensive, it was one bed, one machine. I stepped forward. My grandfather served this country. That machine keeps him breathing. The city cleared the wiring. There is no overload. Celeste didn't argue facts. She argued aesthetics. Residential communities are not hospitals, she said. If we allow one modification, others will follow. The room felt colder. Hands began raising, not to defend us, but to ask about insurance liability and resale values. And then Celeste delivered the real blow. In order to preserve grid integrity, she said smoothly, the board will vote tonight to restrict non-essential medical energy usage pending further review. Non-essential. Walter's oxygen wasn't essential. I stood there as board members whispered among themselves. Celeste looked at me like she'd already won. We'll proceed to vote, she announced. Effective immediately. After the vote, the pressure didn't just increase, it multiplied. Every morning there was something new taped to my door, compliance reminder. Infrastructure violation. Outstanding assessment balance. They came daily now, like clockwork. Celeste had weaponized paperwork. Each notice referenced the previous one, stacking fees on top of fines, fines on top of administrative costs. The numbers were growing faster than I could dispute them. And then the meter checks started. Around 11 at night, I would hear footsteps outside, low voices. The metallic click of the utility panel opening. The first time I looked through the blinds and saw Trent crouched near the shared grid junction with a flashlight in his mouth, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Routine monitoring, he said again when I stepped outside. Monitoring what? Load fluctuation. The next afternoon, it happened. Walter was asleep when the oxygen concentrator stuttered. Just a flicker at first, a dip in the hum. Then silence. 3 seconds. 4. The backup unit kicked in with a shrill warning tone. I was in the hallway before I realized I'd dropped the mug in my hand. Coffee shattered across the tile. Walter's eyes were wide, terrified as he grabbed for the tubing. The main power returned seconds later. Too fast for a storm surge, too precise. I ran outside. No wind. No lightning, clear sky. Across the street, Trent was closing the grid panel. That wasn't random, I said. He shrugged. Aging infrastructure. From that moment on, I stopped trusting coincidence. I installed cameras the same night. Front yard, driveway, rear fence, and one angled perfectly at the utility shed. Celeste didn't like that. Another violation notice appeared. Unauthorized surveillance equipment facing common areas. I ignored it. 3 nights later, the footage gave me what I needed. At 2 in the morning, Trent approached the panel with a toolkit. He opened it, adjusted something, then stepped back and spoke on his phone. Seconds later, my porch lights flickered. He wasn't inspecting. He was testing. I took the footage to the police. The officer barely watched 30 seconds. HOA disputes are civil matters, he said, handing my phone back. Unless there's visible damage or assault, this stays between you and the board. But he's tampering with my power, I insisted. He's accessing shared infrastructure. Shared. Everything suddenly belonged to them. Meanwhile, Walter's condition began slipping. Stress is poison when your lungs barely work. He started waking at night, asking if the machine would shut off again. He apologized constantly. I don't want you losing your house because of me, he whispered one evening. You're not the problem, I told him. But I was starting to feel cornered. The fines had reached a number that would have made sense if I'd built a factory in the garage. Infrastructure strain surcharge, grid integrity penalty, administrative escalation fee. Then Celeste escalated beyond money. A certified letter arrived threatening lien placement for unpaid assessments. It referenced foreclosure proceedings if balances remained unresolved. Foreclosure. Over oxygen. I drove straight to the clubhouse. Celeste was alone in the conference room reviewing documents. You're threatening to take my house, I said. You're threatening the community's electrical stability, she replied calmly. You know there's no overload, she folded her hands. The board must protect the majority. From what? She didn't blink. Precedent. That word again. Outside, I began noticing subtle shifts. Neighbors parking farther from my driveway. Conversations cutting short when I approached. Someone reported my trash bins for being out 2 hours past pickup. It was coordinated. Isolation is part of control. The power flickered again 2 days later, shorter this time, but long enough for Walter's monitor to alarm. His oxygen levels dipped lower than they had in months. That night, I sat in the dark hallway listening to the machine hum, waiting for it to fail. I wasn't sleeping anymore. Then the final envelope arrived. Certified. Heavy. I opened it standing over the kitchen counter. Scheduled power safety correction. Within 72 hours, the HOA would conduct mandatory electrical adjustments to restore infrastructure compliance. Adjustment. They were coming for the line. And this time, I knew it wouldn't be a flicker. I stopped reacting. That was the shift. Up until then, I'd been scrambling, putting out fires, responding to notices, defending myself one accusation at a time. But when that power safety correction letter arrived, something inside me clicked into place. If Celeste wanted a fight, she was about to get one she didn't understand. The first call I made was to Naomi Reyes. Naomi used to oversee logistics for the regional hospital network I worked with years ago. She understood infrastructure, compliance, and federal medical protections better than anyone I knew. When I explained what the HOA was threatening, she didn't hesitate. They can't interfere with life-sustaining medical equipment, she said flatly. Federal disability accommodation law overrides HOA covenants. If they knowingly disrupt power to a documented medical device, that's not a civil matter anymore. That word, knowingly, hung in the air. They're calling it infrastructure correction. Then you document intent, she replied. And you make sure you're prepared. Prepared. The second thing I did was study the grid design for Briar Hollow Estates. As a biomedical technician, I understand power systems, but I pulled the county utility schematics anyway. I wanted confirmation. Each home in Briar Hollow was individually metered. Individually. Which meant any shutoff or adjustment affecting only my house would require deliberate targeting. There was no such thing as an accidental single home outage in this layout. I printed the schematics and walked them across the street to Darius Cole. Darius had retired from the electric company 5 years earlier. Quiet guy. Kept to himself. I'd helped him with a pacemaker monitor installation once, and we'd stayed friendly. He studied the diagrams for less than a minute. There's no overload risk here, he said. Your panel's rated well under threshold. If they touch your line, they're choosing to. Choosing. That was the difference between maintenance and sabotage. Over the next week, I started digging into something else that had been gnawing at me. The whispers. 3 elderly homeowners had sold their houses in the past year. All had health issues. All had received repeated HOA violations before listing their properties. I pulled public sale records. Each home sold under market value. Buyer, Red Crest Holdings. Same corporate mailing address. I traced Red Crest further. Small real estate acquisition group specializing in distressed residential opportunities. 2 board members shared professional connections with Celeste Harrow from a previous development project in another county. My stomach tightened. This wasn't about grid integrity. This was pressure. Target vulnerable homeowners. Label them non-compliant. Make staying unbearable. Then swoop in with a convenient cash offer. Celeste wasn't protecting property values. She was manufacturing inventory. That realization replaced my panic with something sharper. Controlled anger. I began documenting everything. Every notice scanned and cataloged. Every meter check video backed up to cloud storage. Every email archived. I installed an audio recorder near the grid junction, legal in this state for recording activity on my own property line. Naomi helped me draft a formal letter citing federal disability accommodation statutes and clearly notifying the HOA that any interruption of power would constitute deliberate interference with life-sustaining medical equipment. I sent it certified. Celeste responded with a single-line email, "Infrastructure correction will proceed as scheduled." Good. Then I made the most important call. Premier Mobile Power Solutions. I need an industrial-grade hospital backup unit, I said. 40-foot mobile generator, automatic transfer capability. The dispatcher paused. That's commercial-level equipment. So is what they're about to mess with. We arranged standby deployment, discreet. On-call. If power dropped, the truck would roll immediately. Darius agreed to alert a utility supervisor he trusted if anything suspicious happened. Naomi prepared documentation for rapid escalation if necessary. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I was building layers. That night, I sat beside Walter's bed while the concentrator hummed steadily. He looked at me through tired eyes. "You look different," he said softly. "I am." He squeezed my hand weakly. "Don't let them scare you. They don't scare me anymore." My phone buzzed. An automated HOA reminder about scheduled power safety correction. 72 hours. I forwarded the notice to Naomi. Then I typed back a single message. "If they touch that line, I'm ready." I stopped waiting for them to make the next move. I upgraded everything. The cameras went from basic security to full coverage, high-resolution night vision, cloud backup, redundant storage. I added a second angle on the grid junction, one hidden beneath the eaves where no one would think to look. Motion alerts synced directly to my phone. If someone breathed near that panel, I'd know. Then I placed the audio recorder. It sat inside a weatherproof housing just within my property boundary, angled toward the shared utility shed. Perfectly legal. Perfectly positioned. If Celeste wanted to pretend this was about infrastructure, I was going to record every word of it. Darius came by 2 evenings before the scheduled correction. He leaned against the fence, studying the panel from across the street. "If they open that without utility authorization, they're crossing a line," he said. "I've got a contact downtown. One call, and he'll know something's off." "You think they'll risk it?" He gave me a look that said he already knew the answer. I drafted one final letter to Celeste. It was calm, clinical, precise. I cited federal disability accommodation statutes. I included the municipal clearance documentation. I referenced individual metering schematics. I made it clear that any interruption of power to life-sustaining equipment would constitute intentional interference. I sent it certified and via email. Her response didn't come privately. It came in the HOA group thread, sent to the entire community. "While we appreciate Mr. Stay, Mr. Simp, Boone's passion," she wrote, "no homeowner is above community standards. Briar Hollow will not be transformed into a medical complex." Medical complex. Several neighbors replied with vague support for uniform rules. A few stayed silent. No one defended us publicly. Isolation again. Later that afternoon, a new notice appeared on my door. "Emergency Compliance Correction Board authorized." They weren't backing down. I called Premier Mobile Power Solutions to reconfirm. 40-foot industrial unit still available, I asked. "Yes, sir. Diesel-powered hospital-grade capacity. Automatic transfer compatible. How fast can it roll?" "Under 30 minutes once dispatched. Keep a crew ready." The dispatcher paused. "Expecting trouble?" "I'm planning for it." That evening, Walter seemed more tired than usual. Stress does that. It settles into the lungs first. I sat beside his bed, checking oxygen saturation levels while the concentrator hummed steady and reliable. "They're trying to wear you down," he said quietly. "I know. Make you choose between peace and me." I looked at him sharply. "That's not a choice." He studied the ceiling for a long moment before speaking again. "Don't let them push you out of your own home." The weight of that sentence landed heavier than any fine. Outside, the neighborhood was deceptively calm, sprinklers ticking, porch lights glowing warm, lawns trimmed to perfection. But beneath that stillness was movement. At 10 that night, I received an automated notification, "Motion detected near utility junction." I checked the feed. Trent. He approached the panel, knelt down, examined the lock, then stepped back without touching it. Testing. Measuring. He glanced toward my house as if he could feel the cameras watching. "Good. Let him." At 11:30, Darius texted, "Utility contact aware, on alert." Naomi sent a final message, "Documentation ready if escalation required." Everything was layered. Everything was recorded. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. The storm began rolling in just after 1:30, low thunder in the distance, wind brushing the trees. The kind of weather that made outages easy to explain, convenient. At 1:58, my phone buzzed. Email from Celeste Harrow. Subject line, "Final notice." I opened it, standing in the hallway outside Walter's room. "Infrastructure adjustment begins at 2 a.m. No ambiguity, no hesitation. Just time, 2 a.m. The storm arrived right on schedule. Not violent at first, just enough wind to rattle shutters and bend the trees into restless shapes. Rain began as a soft hiss against the pavement, then thickened into sheets that blurred the streetlights into glowing halos. Inside my house, every camera feed was open on my laptop. Timestamp glowing in the corner, 1:58. 1:59, 2 a.m. Motion alert. The utility shed camera flickered as 3 figures stepped into frame. Celeste Harrow, first. Trench coat pulled tight against the rain, hair pinned back like she was heading into a board meeting instead of a midnight operation. Behind her, Gavin Pike holding a flashlight. And Trent Lowell carrying something long and metallic, bolt cutters. They didn't knock, they didn't announce. They unlocked the panel with a master key. I leaned closer to the screen, volume turned up. The audio recorder caught their voices through the storm. Storm load will cover fluctuation, Gavin muttered. Make it clean, Celeste replied, single line. Don't trip the block. Trent crouched and angled the cutters toward a cable junction. My pulse slammed in my ears. Just enough to force compliance, Celeste added calmly. If he wants to run a hospital, he can relocate. The metallic snap cut through the rain. Inside my house, everything went dark. Walter's ICU monitor exploded into sound. A piercing, relentless alarm. The oxygen concentrator died mid-hum. Then the backup battery kicked in with a warning tone that was somehow worse, shriller, more urgent, counting down silently behind the noise. I was already moving, but I didn't run outside immediately. That was the hardest part. I forced myself to stay by the laptop long enough to confirm the camera angle. Clear view. Celeste standing upright as if she'd just completed a routine maintenance check. Gavin glancing up and down the street, Trent closing the panel slowly. Document it. Then I ran. Rain hit my face like needles as I tore down the driveway. The house behind me pulsed faint red from Walter's monitor flashing through the window. You cut it, I shouted. Celeste turned with an expression so composed it felt rehearsed. Infrastructure correction, she said over the storm. Your load exceeded safe parameters. You're lying. She gestured toward the dark house. The community cannot subsidize private facilities. Behind the curtains, neighbors began appearing. Porch lights clicked on one by one. Doors cracked open just enough for silhouettes to form. Whispers carried through the rain. What happened? Transformer issue? Celeste projected her voice carefully, like she was addressing an audience. This home has been warned repeatedly. Medical equipment modifications were never approved. Walter's alarm shrieked again from inside. I stepped closer, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might split my ribs. You knew he's on oxygen. Backup systems are your responsibility, she replied smoothly. The battery. I bolted back inside. Walter's chest was rising too fast. Too shallow. The digital display glowed harsh red. Countdown active. 40%, 38. He gripped my wrist. Marcus, I've got it, I said, though my throat was tight. Outside, more neighbors had gathered under umbrellas, phones out. Recording. Celeste stood beneath the streetlight, rain sliding off her coat, speaking quietly to Gavin like this was just another compliance victory. The cameras were still rolling, every second documented. The battery indicator dropped again, 25%. The machine let out a lower warning tone, slower now, like a heartbeat fading. I grabbed my phone. This was the moment. Walter's oxygen level dipped on the screen. 22% battery, 21. As it hit 20%, I typed 2 words and pressed send. Deploy it. For 3 seconds after I sent the text, nothing happened. The storm swallowed the street again. Rain hammered the pavement. Walter's oxygen monitor pulsed red in the dark hallway behind me. Then I heard it, a deep diesel roar, not the sharp wail of police sirens. Something heavier. Headlights swung around the corner at the entrance to Briar Hollow Estates, cutting through the rain like twin search beams. The engine growled louder, closer, until a massive 40-foot generator truck turned into our narrow HOA street. It looked absurdly out of place, industrial, powerful, unapologetic, dwarfing the manicured hedges and decorative lampposts. Floodlights snapped on. The entire street lit up like a stadium. Neighbors gasped. Celeste spun around, her composure cracking for the first time. What is that? The truck stopped directly in front of my house. The side panel read, Emergency Medical Power Support. 2 technicians jumped out in reflective jackets, moving with calm, practiced urgency. Marcus Boone? One shouted over the storm. Here, primary feed down, deliberately cut. They didn't hesitate. Cables as thick as my wrist uncoiled across the wet pavement. One technician accessed my external transfer panel, pre-installed, waiting for this exact moment. The generator roared louder as they powered up. Inside the house, Walter's ICU system flickered, then surged back to life. The oxygen concentrator hummed steady again. The red warning vanished. Outside, Celeste was marching toward the truck. "You cannot park that here," she shouted. "This is unauthorized commercial equipment." The lead technician didn't even look at her. "Medical emergency infrastructure, federally protected." Her face tightened. I stepped beside the truck and lifted my tablet high enough for the crowd to see. "Before anyone believes this was an accident," I said loudly, "listen carefully." I tapped play. Through the rain and engine noise, the recorded audio filled the street. Celeste's voice. "Storm load will cover fluctuation, make it clean. Single line." Gavin's response. "Just enough to force compliance." A ripple moved through the neighbors like a shockwave. "That's from tonight," I continued. "Captured at the utility shed." Celeste's eyes widened. "That's manipulated. It's time-stamped." Darius stepped forward from the crowd holding printed utility schematics. "Each home is individually metered. That shutoff was targeted." Right on cue, another set of headlights approached. This time, city markings. A municipal utility inspector climbed out, raincoat collar turned up. Darius must have made the call the moment the line dropped. "What's going on here?" the inspector demanded. I pointed toward the panel. "Unauthorized access. Intentional interruption of medical equipment power." The inspector's gaze hardened as he examined the cut cable. "Who authorized this?" Celeste opened her mouth, then hesitated. My phone was still connected to Naomi on speaker. "Federal compliance hotline is active," she announced calmly through the speaker. "Interference with life-sustaining medical devices is a prosecutable offense." That was when Celeste truly lost control. "This is hysteria," she snapped. "He's operating a medical facility. The HOA has jurisdiction." "No," the inspector said flatly. "You don't." Police cruisers finally rolled in, lights flashing red and blue against the manicured facades. But the energy had shifted. They weren't here to dismiss it as civil anymore. One officer examined the panel. Another replayed the audio clip from my tablet. The technicians continued securing the generator feed, unfazed. Gavin quietly stepped backward into the crowd. Trent disappeared entirely. Celeste tried one last time. "This vehicle is blocking residential access," she insisted, pointing at the generator truck. The officer shook his head. "It's classified as emergency medical infrastructure." "You want to push this further?" Silence. Rain dripped from her hair. The street that once applauded her elections now watched in stunned quiet. Neighbors began whispering, not about overloads or property values, but about Redcrest Holdings. About the other seniors who'd sold under pressure. About patterns that suddenly made sense. The officer turned to Celeste. "Ma'am, we need you to step aside for questioning." "For questioning," she repeated, disbelief cracking her voice. She glanced around as if expecting someone to defend her. No one moved. As she was escorted toward the cruiser, the generator's deep, steady hum filled the street. Stronger than her shouting, stronger than the storm. Inside the house, Walter's oxygen level stabilized on the monitor. The machine breathed for him again. And outside, beneath flashing patrol lights reflecting off pristine HOA lawns, Celeste Harrell finally understood what it felt like to lose control. The storm cleared by morning. What it left behind wasn't just puddles and broken branches. It left an investigation. Within 48 hours, city utilities confirmed what the footage already proved. The power line to my home had been deliberately cut at the junction. No overload. No shared transformer issue. Just a targeted interruption. Once that thread was pulled, everything else began unraveling. Emails surfaced. Financial disclosures were examined. Property transfers were reviewed. And there it was, the pattern. Celeste Harrow had been communicating with Redcrest Holdings for over a year. Not casually, strategically. 3 elderly homeowners had been pressured through escalating violations, then quietly approached with fair market solutions. Each sale below appraisal, each home resold months later at a profit. The same language she used on me, infrastructure concerns, precedent, property value preservation, appeared in correspondence discussing encouraging voluntary turnover. Encouraging. The word made me sick. Criminal charges followed quickly: utility tampering, reckless endangerment, abuse of authority, and coordinated property manipulation. Celeste was removed as HOA president immediately pending trial. Gavin resigned before formal proceedings reached him. Trent stopped answering his door altogether. The board itself was dissolved under emergency review. For the first time since we moved into Briar Hollow, the silence felt different, not tense, not watchful, just quiet. Neighbors began knocking on my door, not to complain, but to apologize. Mrs. Burses. Calder brought soup. The Hendersons admitted they'd been afraid to speak up. Even a few who had supported Celeste at meetings confessed they hadn't realized how far it had gone. Fear isolates people. Exposure reconnects them. A special community assembly was called 2 weeks later, this time not for punishment but reform. A new clause was voted in unanimously, explicit medical protection accommodations for any resident requiring life-sustaining equipment. No board override. No discretionary loopholes. It passed without a single objection. The same street that once whispered about optics now debated backup power grants and emergency preparedness plans. Permanent safeguards were installed at my home. Independent lock protection at the panel. Utility monitoring flagged for unauthorized access alerts. When the generator truck finally rolled away, it wasn't under tension. It left slowly, almost ceremonially, after confirming stable grid restoration and redundant backup systems in place. Walter stood at the window as it departed. They looked like a convoy heading out after a mission, he said with a faint smile. His oxygen levels had stabilized since the night of the outage. Stress markers dropped. His sleep improved. The constant fear that the machine might fail had finally lifted. Peace does more for recovery than medicine sometimes. A few neighbors encouraged me to run for HOA president during the restructuring. I declined. Power wasn't what I wanted. Accountability was. I did, however, sit on the oversight committee that rewrote enforcement policies. Transparency requirements, public vote thresholds, third-party review for any infrastructure action, no more midnight corrections. Months later, Briar Hollow looked the same on the surface. Trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, neat sidewalks, but it felt different. It wasn't obsessed with perfection anymore. It understood something it hadn't before. A home is not defined by landscaping. It's defined by who it protects. One evening, I sat beside Walter's bed while the concentrator hummed steady and strong. The sound that once felt fragile now felt permanent. Outside, children rode bikes down the street without whispers trailing behind them. Porch lights glowed warm, no tension in the air. Just neighborhood. Walter closed his eyes, breathing evenly. And for the first time since Celeste decided oxygen was a violation, Briar Hollow was peaceful again. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?